in. A big welcome to everyone. I hope everyone's doing well and as excited as I am for the AMA with Abacus co-founder Jon Kol. Please pop in the chat where you're joining from today. I'm joining from London. However, I'm not British. Thank goodness. Probably offend a few people by saying that. I'm South African. But yeah, I'm Jake. I'm a program manager at Encode, and I'll kind of be your MC today for everything. Jon, a huge welcome to you. I presume you're joining from the US. How's everything going today?
So far, so good. I am joining from the US. I'm here in New York right now. That's where part of our team is based. Kind of new to the East Coast myself, but it's growing on me. Very excited to be here with you all today. I'm a big fan of the Encode program, and it's something that as a team we want to keep supporting, and through AMAs and our workshops, and just love the work you guys are doing at Encode. So always happy to be a part of it.
Lovely, thanks so much. Yeah, we've also got a couple team members on the East Coast in New York as well, so they'll be joining soon. So yeah, thanks so much. I'll quickly run over kind of what's on the cards for today, and then we can jump things off with the AMA. I'm sure that's kind of why we all want to get involved. But first I'll give a quick little introduction of Jon, and then I'll ask him a couple questions, and then we'll open the floor to kind of all of you. You can ask kind of all the questions you want. As usual, if you can please have your cameras on, it makes a nice kind of welcome environment for Jon. If you can't, completely understandable as well. And kind of once the floor is opened, please can you just kind of just raise your hand by doing that, and then we'll kind of hand over, sorry, that's a bit ironic, but we'll hand over to you to ask a question to Jon. Obviously we all prefer kind of live questions, but if you can't ask a question or you may be a little bit shy, don't worry about it. You can ask in the chat, and I can make sure that your question is answered. Before we kick things off, a little bit about Encode. Encode Club is an educational community. We support our community through educational series, boot camps, hackathons, accelerators, and AMAs such as this. We work with the leading chains and protocols within the space. We also support our community through helping them get their dream Web3 job, as well as some funding for their project. Yeah, as I said, today we're joined by a very special guest, Jon Kol. Jon actually led the investment round for Encode while he was working at Galaxy Digital, so it even makes it more special that he is here. Jon grew up in Israel before making the jump to go study economics at UC Berkeley, where he graduated magna cum laude. Jon then moved into the big bad world of banking, where he was a bond trader at Morgan Stanley. This is where he first learned about crypto, and then left the banking behind to join Passport Capital, where he would work as a venture investor. Jon then moved into Galaxy Digital, where he built the investment team there. While he was at Galaxy Digital, he met MIT ComSci graduate Asa Oines, who would go on to co-found Abacus Network with. Abacus Network is a developer platform enabling interchain applications. Abacus apps share states despite being on numerous blockchains. Abacus tries to solve many problems with the monolithic architecture of decentralized applications. Abacus Network also provides on-chain APIs to send and receive interchange messages. Jon, I hope I did Abacus Network justice there through my explanation. I'm sure you can dive into it at a later stage and explain it a lot better than I did. But I'm sure we'll jump straight into the AMA. Yeah, so Jon, we'll go back a couple of years to your time in Israel. I know it's a while back. What was it that you actually wanted to grow up to be? And I guess, how does that compare to where you are today?
Astronaut. I always wanted to be an astronaut. Since about 4 years old, I wanted to be an astronaut. I, unfortunately, am not an astronaut yet. I plan to get there, hoping to end up on Mars at some point, but there's some time left in that. And, I gave up on the best chance I had of that about 10 years ago, or actually not 14 years ago now, where I deliberately failed the IDF's pilot, they do like these sorting for will you enter like the Air Force pilot course. I deliberately failed the third stage, and that didn't think about it at the time. That was my best shot of ever becoming an astronaut, and they're just probably not coming back.
And I guess, yeah, compared to today, you are kind of in Web3, not an astronaut, but I'm sure your time will come if Elon has anything to do with how things transpire.
That's right. Luckily, you know, I couldn't do it, but he's taking care of things, so it's okay. You know, we'll take care of, you know, traveling between the dangerous space of blockchains, and he can take care of the actual physical space and getting us to Mars. So.
A fun fact, we actually went to the same school in South Africa, so I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I'm sure we can move on swiftly. Yeah, so I guess we can fast forward a couple of years to you being a bond trader at Morgan Stanley, and I hear this is where you found out about crypto for the first time. I guess, yeah, how did you actually find out about kind of crypto and Web3? And how was it received by your co-workers in an investment bank environment?
So I heard about it through so I went to school at Berkeley, and like there was at the time the club didn't exist yet, but the people who would go on to start this club, Blockchain at Berkeley, that now is probably one of the stronger, bigger blockchain clubs, was just kind of forming. And so there was some buzz, you know, about this like Ethereum thing, right? Like it was actually much more Ethereum based than it ever was, you know, Bitcoin based. And one day over, you know, the spring of 2016, a friend of mine who, for whatever reason, right, like had some available cash, was telling me, John, I'm going to put all of my money into Ethereum. What do you think? Should I do it? Should I not do it? And he's asking me this because I'm the only one he knows who's in finance. So he assumes I know something about like managing money, which was a bold assumption at the time. And you know, that was a Saturday, and we basically spent the next 2 days kind of like digging into it. I remember distinctly like being late Monday morning, which I got, you know, wasn't a good thing to do in an investment bank. But we got very much into Ethereum, and from that point on, I was like, "There's nothing else I want to spend my time on." And it was not well received. I was the laughing stock of my trading desk for a very, very long time, basically until the day that I left, which is about a year and a half after this started. You know, I came back and I was starting to tell everybody that same morning. I'm like, "Oh my God, like you guys have to look into this thing. Like, we got to find a way to get involved." And I remember speaking to like my director and his director and trying to figure out how we can do it. And at one point, actually, the guy who ran the San Francisco fixed income operation, he was very kind. It was also very straightforward. And after 4 months or so of me trying to like make something crypto related happen, this is like late 2016 in Morgan Stanley, he's like, "Listen, kid, not happening here." It's like, "Here's what we're good at. Like, we'll be innovative on things that look like this, and that. This thing specifically, like I'm telling you, just we don't do a lot of this. Like, just if you really want to do it, you're gonna have to go somewhere else." And at that point, I was like, "That's it. I got to find the best opportunity I can and spend the next year being the desk's laughing stock." But through my desk, I actually found my first real opportunity in crypto. I had some others that I came to by myself, but they wouldn't have ended up well now with retrospect. They didn't feel right at the time. I didn't take them. And that's how I ended up at Passport, because they were longtime clients of some of my colleagues in Morgan Stanley.
Yeah. And I guess a quick question off the back of that would be, are you in contact with any of these Morgan Stanley co-workers or ex-co-workers now? And I
Often
guess,
enough.
yeah.
Often enough, yeah. So the ones who were like always supportive, those are the ones who were like, I kind of, so my direct boss, he was amazing. His boss also was amazing. They also, you know, they like thought it's a little bit out there, but they were like, you know, you do you. You're always like the odd man out on this desk. So still in touch with them. They were asking a lot about like the last 2 years, how they can get involved, and like really wanted to learn, and pretty happy that they were. There's some others who like were much more aggressive in how uninterested they were in crypto, or how silly they thought it was, or how stupid they thought I was for being into it. And maybe their text messages are not as, I'm not as quick to reply to those, but still in pretty good contact. You know, I wouldn't tell you we talk every day, maybe we talk once every few months.
Yeah.
With a lot of the old colleagues. I don't recommend to anyone to get into banking, but if you must, I'd say Morgan Stanley is probably one of the best firms to do it at, and it has outstanding people. The one thing they do right is they tend to get good people. Not all of them stay, but they get a lot of good ones.
Yeah. I unfortunately live with a couple of investment bankers in London, and I'm also often the laughing stock once in a while, but it's fine. Hopefully I'll prove that as well. Yeah, so I guess post Morgan Stanley, you moved kind of onto Passport Capital and then Galaxy Digital as, I'll say, a broad term investor. And I guess a question a bit more based from an investor standpoint, kind of based on your experience at these two companies, what advice would you give to a project that is going to go full time in Web3? We've got a lot of future, hopefully, developers and entrepreneurs in the audience. I'm sure they would love to hear kind of your expertise.
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do is to try and fully immerse yourself as much as you can, because for whatever reason, we have a community that is still has a very large amount of, if you classify kind of like missionaries and mercenaries, we still have a ton of missionaries in crypto. Their percent on the total has declined, of course, because there's been a lot of new entrants, and many of them are just here because they think it's interesting, but they're not like really all in. And so kind of going that all in, really immersing yourself is, I think, a huge impact that you can have. And once you've done that, you'll begin to develop your own innate interests as kind of like subcategories in the field. And so instead of trying to be on top of everything, because now the industry is really very big and wide, and crypto is a substrate for interesting things. It's not like its own thing, really, not anymore. And stop trying to be on top of everything. Just pursue your interests directly and just become the best person to talk to about one of those kind of like industry, sub verticals, and develop that as your own interest. For those who are, this is doubly true for those who are trying to become investors, right? It is going to be impossible to try and stay on top of everything. For me, like, that topic was always interoperability, because it seemed wild that like these super cool internet computers just can't speak to each other, and for all intents and purposes might basically be, faraway planets or in different galaxies. And I remember thinking, like, back in 2017, there's no way this is gonna stay in the kid. Like, no way this is gonna get figured out in like a year. And 5 years later, it's still not. And that's kind of what, when I met Asa and Nam, who now are good friends and my co-founders in this, like, if I hadn't spent all that time thinking about this, right, like it would have never worked. So highly recommend everyone to kind of resist the urge to try and know everything about everything. Resist the urge to follow like what people tell you should within the industry, and just what is interesting to you, because we are in a space that is still ascending. I know the market might lead you to believe that's not the case, but I'm super biased. It does definitely feel like it's still ascending. So becoming the person who is the go-to on given topics is incredibly valuable, much more valuable today than it was even just 2 years ago.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's some really, really good advice. I think a lot of people do want to know everything about the whole space. So I guess it's probably now a good time, before I ask my next couple of questions, for you to give a proper description and explanation of Abacus Network and improve on my.
Absolutely. So let's start with like the most simple and take it from there. At the most simple version of what this is, the TLDR, it's an on-chain API to send messages between blockchains. Now, what can you do with this API? You could transfer any bit of information, any bytes from one place to another. Well, if you can do that, then now as an application developer, you can now actually build an app that allows accepts, interactions from pretty much any blockchain that it's on. And if you think like there's a lot of people, myself included, who hold this view that eventually no end user will have to be concerned with which blockchain they're on, or like where does the thing run, or like which gas token is being utilized. Well, it's not going to happen by magic. Something needs to, that infrastructure needs to be built. Those tools need to be made available. And you can think of Abacus Network as very much one of those tools. So we have our protocol. This is the thing that actually enables you to send those messages. It is deployed fully in smart contracts on every chain that we support. There's these things, they look like, we call them mailboxes, an outbox and an inbox. They do exactly what they sound like. As your app will message the outbox on one chain that it's on, and send that message to an inbox on the relevant chain that it's also on. And we also create toolings, like we have our SDK, we have just our documentation, everything to make using that protocol really, really easy. Kind of the thing that we are, I'd say, kind of like relentlessly focused on, or just, perhaps obsessed with, hopefully not to an unpleasant degree, is just what is the experience like of using this as a developer. And so we're concerned with how easy is this for you to work with, to integrate, but also how does this make it easy for you to build a delightful application, because you're ultimately trying to build something that will be, wonderful in of itself. And we just need to make this one part really right. So obviously that's kind of like a high level explanation, and we can obviously get as down into the weeds as people want.
Perfect. Yeah, I hope that I think we can shoot away on a quick question, I guess, while we're here. But is Abacus similar to kind of LayerZero, or is that?
It definitely has similarities in a sense of like what we're trying to accomplish. So think of what I described earlier. And now let's think of, like, imagine there's an iceberg that's in the water. So the protocol, like the whole thing is the iceberg. And now the part that peaks outside of the water, what a developer, the minimal interface they have to use, that's what all this tooling that we've built, that's what you can see. In that sense, pretty similar to LayerZero, that those are the things where, like, it's kind of, I'd say, subjective differences. Some people might like our interface better. The part that's underneath the water, the actual protocol, and how those messages are communicated, how they're secured, that's where things are pretty different. But if you really think about, like, hey, I want to build an application that can communicate with multiple chains, that can serve users regardless of where they are, and instead of asking users to come to you as the application, as things are now, where it's, hey, I'm on Avalanche, come to me on Avalanche. It's, I'm going to come to you, user, wherever you are. So that part is certainly similar.
Yeah, perfect. We'll jump back into those other questions in the chat. I've got one or two more, and then we can go into the opening the floor. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of met Asa at Galaxy Digital, or while you're working at Galaxy Digital. And I guess this would kind of end up being the perfect team, if you can say. You a crypto-loving econ graduate, and him a former kind of MIT, ComSci, software, Google engineer, software engineer. I guess we can maybe go back to, how did you meet, and how did this idea of Abacus Network come about?
It's a great question. So it's a fun story. I originally met this group when it was just kind of like coming about. There's three of us co-founders, as I said before, Asa and Nam and myself. Asa and Nam are actually two of the first engineers who basically, I mean, they might be too humble to say it, I'll say it for them because they're amazing. They're definitely two of the best that organization had. They pretty much built that blockchain and its protocol from the ground up. And again, are just like absolutely world-class engineers. And so at one point, the C Labs organization had people working on an interoperability protocol called Optics, Asa and Nam being amongst those. And they were thinking about what to do with it. And through one way or another, we got connected. This is about a year ago now. And, as I mentioned before, in the recommendation, like, hey, people should actually just figure out what interests them and which area they should just kind of like really dig into. Mine was interoperability. So like, look at that serendipity. And you happen to meet two like amazing people who are working on this thing that you are very naturally interested in. And so, from there, one thing led to another. In that original kind of group of people, there were also Zaki Manyan, who is one of the Cosmos and IBC kind of co-creators, and Morgan Beller, who really is probably the if this was a heist crew, she would kind of be like Danny Ocean, if you're familiar with like the Ocean's 11 movies. She played a big role in bringing the gang together, and one thing led to another. And as an investor, I always used to think like the best investments you could make are the ones where you would really leave everything and go join those people. And so I had to leave everything and go join those people.
Perfect. Yeah, that is an awesome story. So I actually I recently heard Asa and yourself talking about the 3 areas of interoperability. And I guess I'll touch on it quick and then hand over you to kind of explain these 3 kind of areas. One being asset interoperability, app-based interoperability, interoperability with rules. Do you maybe want to explain these 3 areas? I find it really fascinating, and I'm sure you can explain it a lot better than I can to the audience.
Certainly. So think of these as like, these areas are all playing out at the same time, but they started in different times. This first era of, we call it like a defined rules or defined rule set interoperability. This is kind of started probably in 2015 or 16. This is where the design started to come about. Really, the first of which were Cosmos and IBC, Polkadot, and XCMP, the kind of like interoperability protocol within the substrate and parachain ecosystem. And both of these work incredibly well. But what they ask you to do is to kind of build a blockchain in consideration of this very well understood, well-defined set of rules. It has to look, in the case of IBC, it has to have a light client, it's got to have fast finality, it's got to have a few other things. And if it does, like, great. It just works. And it made a ton of sense to go with this design because at the time, it's pretty unclear which blockchain is going to kind of be dominant. And I think both builders and investors equally thought it's, maybe Ethereum will become dominant, but why not Cosmos, which will come just a couple years later? Why not Polkadot, right? And as a pitch, that certainly made sense at that time. I think it still makes sense, but it just a tad more limited. And one thing has to be said, certainly like IBC, which is one of these defined rule set methods, is if you could get the entire world to opt into it, it is by far the best way to do interoperability, right? Like the trade-offs that it takes make it the best, but it's more limited. Then after that, we started late 2018. By mid-2019, these became much more common, what we've been calling asset-based interoperability. So think of just bridges, where they say like, hey, take an asset, here you can move it around using these tools. And we're pretty familiar with all these tools. I imagine most people who are on the call today who've moved crypto around probably use at least one, whether it's like, if you are an Axie player, you may have used the Ronin bridge. If you may have used Gravity to get into the Cosmos ecosystem from Ethereum. You may have used, Rainbow to go from ETH to Near. But we felt that obviously there's a ton of value there, but this is a need that the dominant market players at the time, which were a lot of them were trading firms, people like us at Galaxy, Jump, and it's obviously no surprise that some of the best tools that fit this era were actually built by trading firms, right? Like the Wormholes bridge is one of the best ones ever made. Despite, yes, there was that security incident, but like the thing itself functions most of the time and it works incredibly well. And now we are led into this third era, where it's instead of trying to put the onus of interoperability on the user and on assets, let's handle it through the app. Let's let app communicate across chains instead of just moving the assets around and communicate with the apps that are on those chains. And this is something that certainly people like us are sparking. LayerZero, Axelar, Wormhole probably is going to assume at some point go down this direction. I see Nomad in the chat. Nomad certainly as well fits this description. And I think all of us are trying to kind of bring more awareness to, hey, maybe interoperability should move through apps, and the burden should be on the developers building that app to connect it across blockchains. And now the most interesting part is none of these have ended, right? They're all happening at the same time, because it's not like the people of Polkadot is like going to call it a day and be like, no, we've been wrong, the past 6 years. No, they're still going. Bridges are still strong despite some of the issues that we see with them. And certainly, right, like all of us, we were just getting started, right? Like this era is not even a year old. And it's interesting to watch it all play out in real time.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I found that fascinating when I read up about it for the first time. So I hope the audience also found it as fascinating. Okay, I'm going to have one more question to the audience. Well, to you, Jon, but this is to the audience. And then if you can please raise your hand if you have any in-person questions, online questions, face-to-face questions in the meantime. So, Jon, I guess we're obviously kind of a community full of developers. There are a lot of other non-developers, I'm sure, in the chat as well, and on the call. But I guess what would actually be the advantages of building cross-chain dApps for developers, and I guess what are kind of maybe some of the risks attached to these cross-chain dApps per se?
That's a great question. Now, before I get into, let me tell you, basically, like the way we view our work is how can we minimize these inherent risks that happen, that just come with this territory? Because it's important to remember, probably everyone here who's like dabbled in blockchain long enough has heard of this thing that we in the industry like to call the Oracle problem. Notably, what this is a blockchain can't be sure about any information that didn't originate from it. That kind of includes everything outside of a singular blockchain. And so what that means is that if you're on Ethereum, there's no way for you to feel, no native way for you to feel good about information that emerged, say, on Cosmos, right? Meaning the Cosmos hub specifically. You need something to like fill in that gap. And once you do that, you're generally beholden at that's the source of that information. And so really many of the interoperability players are trying to figure out like, how can I secure this information transfer? How can I make that as trustworthy, as like least vulnerable as possible? And what happens with a lot of times is that, again, you are based on information emerging from a place that you don't have any good ways to know anything about. You will then commence another action. Sometimes that action might be create money, right? Like mint these tokens. And so you got to be pretty sure that that you can do this right. Now, when it comes to the advantages, right? Like the main advantage that we see for developers are twofold. First, you no longer have to ask. Actually, step back. It's the main advantage we see for developers is really that, like, right now, this question of like, what chain should you build on has massive implications, right? What if you built on the wrong chain, so to speak, right? You happen to go to a place that for whatever reason maybe didn't have enough users, or something catastrophic happened, or you're kind of married to it. And it's very difficult to get divorced in this case. It requires a lot of technical work. And so in that sense, building something that exists and is kind of mobile or fluid between several blockchains reduces that platform risk, reduces the implications of that decision. Why is that? Primarily because it lets you come to users where they are. Whereas right now, with a single chain application, users must be on this chain that you're on or you got to hope that they find a way to come to it. Either way, you're not able to meet them where they are. So imagine you happen to say, I'm going to build on Avalanche, but for whatever reason, everyone migrated away. And now everyone's on Ethereum. What do you do then? And this is kind of what these interchain applications, that I think is the main value to them. And now, how do you do this securely so that there are no catastrophic incidents? As you know, folks, if you want to have a slightly worse day, I recommend going on rect.news, and you can check the leaderboard. It's a website that kind of keeps tracks of, summarizes major security incidents in crypto. And you'll notice that 4 of the largest 5, totaling about $1.7 billion, are all related to interoperability protocols. Again, because this is really, really hard. I think it's, from an engineering perspective, it's kind of like the crypto equivalent of going to the moon. And it wasn't Apollo 1 that got to the moon, right? It took a number of Apollos. Those ships tended to not make it in the early days. And we're still in these early days.
Perfect, thanks. I just went on there. It is quite a site. I've dropped it in the chat. If anybody wants to go check it out.
Yeah, do it at your own peril. It might make your day a little bit worse, but someone reading the incident reports and like their summaries is very, very interesting.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that resource. Okay, so if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. In the meantime, there's quite a few questions in the chat. I'll read them out to you, and then we can hopefully answer them. So the first question: Hey JK, how have your investment criteria changed over the years?
Oh man, a lot. So I think starting off, it was just like, hey, crypto is still so nascent. Let me just try and find things that are interesting. And at the time, I was very, very obsessed with this idea of, this is like 2016, 17, and the 2 most visible types of startup successes were things like Uber and Airbnb. And if you really distill those into the core of what they are, is they were marketplaces that allowed enhanced utilization of idle physical resources. So in one case, it was like there's basically latent cars and driving capacity that's not being tapped into, and the other was there was latent shelter capacity, right? There were these empty rooms, empty apartments, and let's just make it easy to access them. And so I became really enamored with this idea of like, oh my gosh, there's like, you could, if it can be done in the physical world, like no chance this can't be done in the digital world. So I became very interested in like, how are we going to, like, where are there going to be marketplaces, crypto-based marketplaces for digital resources like storage and compute? And storage is seemingly happening. Compute is like still very difficult. I didn't, at the time I was total noob. I didn't understand like the hard problems involved with doing something like that. And so I really spent a lot of time, certainly my first year, kind of, looking at a lot of stuff like that. And that kind of led to being super, super excited at the time about Solana as something that could enable this. And that's how I became involved with that bunch and with them for the very early days in March of 2018. And over time, it just became much more like kind of driven by not specific themes and more like broader, trying to look for these companies that have a chance to kind of create a market or create a category. And I probably, that's the one that really, really struck. And I think as an investor, probably most compelled to invest in companies that are trying to create a market out of thin air and engage in this discipline of category definition. It's certainly something that we're trying to do here. And that part hasn't changed. So that part's probably been going strong since like 2018. And I think what you learn, it's there's a reason why venture capital for years was more of an apprenticeship model, and people kind of worked for would they consider these like venerable partners for a very long time and learn from them. You just need a lot of advance, you need a lot of experience. Certainly maybe the last 5-6 years have convinced people that that's not the case. I've only become more convinced that it is the case. And so there's been some updated, but not as much as you'd think.
Perfect. I guess moving on to the next question is, what is the company that got away, the project you decided not to invest in and ended up going big?
This one is very easy to answer. It's OpenSea. So some of the people I worked with Passport were some of the first like real NFT enthusiasts. In fact, a couple of the people there were obsessed at the time with minting and just buying and collecting CryptoPunks and rare Pepes. Not because like there were some of the first people who would have them as their Telegram avatar. This is like 2017. No one was doing. Everyone thought they're like lame for doing it, but they were just like super into it. And so that kind of between that and my past as like spent a lot of time playing games like World of Warcraft as an MMO gamer throughout most of my childhood and teenage years, and seemed that these things are going to be valuable. Someone is going to value them, and met OpenSea a couple of times, probably at the wrong time, and for really dumb reasons, just couldn't get there. And I think about that all. That was certainly a major mistake. A mistake of judgment, a mistake of valuation. That is absolutely the company that got away.
That's pretty interesting. I guess quite a nice question is, what has disappointed you the most in the industry? And then the opposite, what has surprised you positively over the years?
Oh, wow, that's a very good question. What has disappointed the most? I think the thing that has been disappointing the most is kind of seeing how many people who you would have assumed were kind of genuine in their stances and not actually dogmatic, turn very dogmatic and kind of like opt for what I'd consider to be like sectarian infighting whenever it suited them better. I guess, like a prime example of that are people who were generally like hardline libertarians and thus became Bitcoiners. And then, in recent years kind of want to see like the government pursue some of the things happening on Ethereum and other smart contract platforms. And that is very, very disappointing, right? Because like, I thought we were in this, I thought like ethos was a big part of this. I really got into crypto because I grew up kind of like in a shitty neighborhood in Jerusalem, and like in Israel, people are always aware of like the nation's finances and what's happening and like who's the minister of finance. That's like a well understood thing, and people have a general disfavorable view of the banks. I'm no different. I fucking hate the banks, even though I ended up working at one, and got into because I wanted to reinvent the financial system a little bit, and crypto seemed like the genuinely best chance. And when you find out that actually like those people who told you they're very ethos driven, right? Like they got into Bitcoin because it represented non-sovereign money, it aligned with their like the libertarian ethic, to then see them turn around and be like, well, I am very anti-government intervention, but I actually think that the SEC under Gary Gensler should pursue all these people building like applications on Ethereum, or even worse yet, the actual blockchain builders. I think that is very disappointing. Most surprising. Most surprising is how fast it all happened. So the week of I guess like within the first week of March 12th, 2020, which people who were there will remember as like kind of like the worst day in crypto. There's a decent chance that like everything could have just died that day if not for the valiant efforts of like a few individuals. And in that week, I remember kind of there's a small chat that I'm in with some people who have become very close friends over the last 5 years. And I remember saying like, hey, you know what? This is kind of like going to be our moment, but I'm not ready to, because people were talking about like leaving the industry and like, what will we do next? And I wasn't ready yet. I said, hey, if these next 5 things don't happen by 2024, then all right, I can start thinking about doing something else. And so like the fact that so much has happened so soon after that was hugely surprising, very positively surprising. So like, it's nice to know that we're a little bit ahead of schedule.
Perfect. And I guess Daniela asks, do you miss Galaxy Digital, I presume?
Yeah. You know, I loved all the people that I worked with there. You know, my old partner there, who actually recently went off to start his own investing firm, Michael Jordan. He's an incredible person. I still talk to him all the time. Just working with him. You know, the younger partners that we worked with, Belinda was really great, and you know, Mike Novogratz and like Chris Ferraro, the CIO. They're just all like, they're just awesome people that I had a great time with. You know, I would have been very happy to stay there, but sometimes like you get something in your head and can't get it out. And that's what happened to me with this thing. I just had to do it, but I definitely like missed it a lot.
Perfect. And I guess Pot G asks, if you were to support a blockchain that is not Bitcoin or Ethereum, which would you pick and why?
Ooh, another good question. It would probably be, and this might be like a little bit of a cop-out, but it would be a network that allows us to get access to IBC. So, you know, kind of high on our roadmap is to support Evmos, which is one such like EVM-based network that is IBC compatible, that through which we could get, you know, give our developers access to the broader IBC universe. And the reason why is, again, to give people access to the broader IBC universe. You know, I think a lot of us here are kind of like IBC fanboys. You know, I was not joking earlier when I said I think it's the best way to do things if the entire world opted in to that system, but that doesn't seem to be the case, right? And so like I have to, looking around, like we decided to build for the what we see happening, is not complete compliance with this, the IBC model, but still, like I think some of the most interesting things in crypto are happening in that arena.
Perfect. Thanks. My understanding is that Abacus leverages an optimistic model for approving the minting and burning of assets crossing the bridge. Would Abacus be safe for a re-entrance attack similar to Nomad? Would there be any way for Abacus to protect itself from an attack similar to Nomad, or would smart contracts risk exit and create a similar fate? You can reread that if you want.
There's a lot there, but I'll try to hit all of it. So to the first part of that, like out of the box, like the default configuration actually does not use an optimistic model. Default configuration kind of tries to strike an optimal balance. Sorry for getting my terms. Optimal balance between, latency or speed and security. And so we use a combination of a proof of stake with validators on every network that we support. And then we have kind of like, this is the thing we think is like our real contribution, our real innovation, what we call sovereign consensus, which, really what it does is it lets each application kind of isolate itself and include, if it wants to, like specific validators that must sign a transaction before the transaction can be processed. So again, in the short version is basically like you can have a case where that broader validator set is co-opted or colludes or some crazy bad shit happens and you're isolated from that failure. But in a grander sense, if people really want to, they can use it to actually implement something that looks like an optimistic model. They could use it to customize, parameterize security however they'd like, kind of decide what are the terms by which their app will accept messages. So it can accommodate that model out of the box. The like default, if you didn't do any customization, you wouldn't get that. Now to the second part of the question, would it be safe to a reentrancy attack? So I guess first thing to credit of the Nomad team, that was, obviously it's devastating. It's just a reminder of how brutal crypto is. It sucks. There's just, worse mistakes happen at like Google or like Amazon every day, but when they happen at Amazon, like the order button doesn't work, or like you can't upload a video to YouTube or something like that. It happens in crypto and suddenly someone's out like 9 figures. And that's brutal and just devastating. Now that issue specifically was like a smart contract bug that just related to, again, like the actual code that was implemented. So in that case, right, like when that incident happened, we'd spent a lot of time to review our system, identify, because we do have some code-based commonalities with, in this case, this was changes that we don't have, like, so the things that led to that issue are things that we don't have. Now, even if that had happened, if a specific app at the time, like imagine, forget that specific incidents, there could be many other incidents. Imagine that we somehow would have a different vulnerability. Even if we did have that, applications that are using sovereign consensus could theoretically shield themselves from this. And that's like, again, why we think that this is such an innovative thing, kind of like, sometimes we call it like a defense technology, that really what we want is just to let people kind of own their security in a unique way and not be exposed to, broader system failures. So presumably right under that description, even if something did happen, again, forget the Nomad thing, like it's not going to be the last incident. There are going to be more, right? Like we are playing in the most adversarial battleground that's ever been created. And we believe that our applications, meaning our applications that developers like some of those on this call would build using our platform, could be shielded from these through some of the tools that we provide them, notably sovereign consensus. Sorry, that was long.
No, that's fine. We have time. So. Thanks for the answer. I think that gave a lot of insights. The next question is, what do you think about code encoders? Should they be prosecuted if their code ends up being used in malicious ways, referring to the tornado incident?
I think it's an absolute travesty. I'm an American. I love America. Love it a lot. I think this is one of the biggest government overreaches. I think it's really not different from, I have a lot of opinions on banks, as I said before. I really don't like banks. I hate most banks. I think they're terrible. Like the concept of banking is fine. There's nothing wrong with taking deposits and collecting interest. There's something very wrong with the current structure of most modern Western banking. And we had a bank, HSBC, that basically had custom windows in some of its Mexico branches to accommodate for the bags of cash being deposited by drug cartels. And no one really was arrested, save for a few, lower ranked people. The bank paid a fine and they kind of moved on. But to me, the fact that there could be prosecution on the developer's code where regular people use that code, right? Like Tornado was, right now it's getting a bad rap, but it was a pretty innocuous tool. And really, if not for interoperability protocol related incident, I believe it's #1 on that leaderboard, the Ronin incident, where pretty much most of the proceeds from that hack were deposited directly into Tornado, I don't think any of this happened. So short answer, no, I think it's a travesty. I think, look, if you built a murder app, which is it's like Uber for murderers, and it's hey, order a hit and that's easy, that might have to get prosecuted for that one. Tornado doesn't fit that description. I guess it's a difficult line to draw, but I was very, very disappointed in my government that day.
Emmanuel's got 3 questions. He says, great to have you.
I see those. Actually, Emmanuel, I'm happy to reach out to you and get you those solved specifically. But yes, we are actually including a testnet example, and we will help you solve the hello world thing. Actually, this is something that we already have the change request to add more practical examples than just hello world. So I appreciate that question coming up. And so if you want, since this is very specific, I'm happy to follow up with Emmanuel directly.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, Emmanuel, reach out to me and I'll get you in contact with Jon. Thanks so much, Jon. Okay, perfect. We have one more question that I believe I missed. It's from Bry. It says, do you believe that crypto is just a casino? We can maybe rephrase that unless you want to answer it.
No, it's a great question.
Yeah.
I take it as is, I don't, but I know that lots of parts of it devolve that way. I think unfortunately it's kind of inevitable because people like to gamble. Even as when I was 12, we used to love like going in Israel. You could play sports bets for like government sponsored thing at like the equivalent of like 7-Elevens or I think like these quick stop stores, and we'd put a few shekels on like Real Madrid and Barcelona and just like try and see what. So there's this fun thing that happens with the uncertainty involved in gambling that I think kind of like our species is just a lot of people are into it. And when you create a totally permissionless environment, it's going to end up having a lot of casino elements. I actually just saw an app the other day called the Gen Coin Flip, where it's literally a coin flip app, and you can gamble on like how many heads or tails you'll get in a row, or so. Now, all of that said, I think yes, there is certainly a casino element to it, but within it, or actually, I guess, separate from it, there's some of the most interesting things in the world are happening. I really do think that cryptography has the best chance to kind of like give us the internet and the digital future that we want. And so certainly I don't think it's all a casino. I wouldn't be doing this for 5 years if that's what I thought. And I've fluctuate sometimes. Sometimes I feel like it's more of a casino, sometimes less. But it's not. I've never felt that it's all a casino.
Perfect. Thanks, Jon. I see that's all the questions up. I guess I've got one more question and then we can potentially call it there. It's maybe a bit of a selfish question, being a non-technical econ graduate myself, would kind of be do you have any kind of technical skills? And if so, how did you kind of work on those? And that would probably be, I guess, my general question.
Very little. I mean, like I can write code. I'm by far the worst person on the team, so I don't really do it. A part of it's a consequence of just having like a team of just like world-class engineers, which I'm very, very lucky that they even let me in the room. I think it's just natural. I guess like as a young kid, I was super interested and started learning like HTML and Flash and like Visual Basic. Very young, I guess like 8, 9, 10 years old. Kind of let go of it until after the military because people made fun of me for being a dork. I was very much a dork my entire life, and then after getting out of the army, starting going back to school, there's just like so many resources today, right? And at one point, I became very, very interested in like NBA stats and like playing, fantasy football and like fantasy basketball and things like that. So I had a teacher at Berkeley who was like presenting at the Sloan like sports conferences, and he'd show me how to like use Python to just like do some interesting data analysis and try to build models that you could use for like sports predictions, and so that was the kind of the start of my reemergence. And then luckily, like Stanford has their course available, Berkeley has their courses available, MIT has their course available, and Harvard probably has the most famous one, and CS50 that like you can even like submit homework to and get it graded. And so I just taken a bunch of those, and I wouldn't tell you I'm good, but like I'm like I think getting to a level where you're like, I'm not illiterate anymore. I might not understand everything. I might not be able to write the beautiful prose, but at least I can read most of these things. And if not, I'm like a question away from the explanation. I think that is very doable today. Just it does take a lot of effort, and it takes dedication. And so I would say now, like doing it now, and I have a young daughter, it would probably be impossible to try and do this now and like be on the self-learning schedule. I'd have to like sign up for an actual class where there's accountability, and I would highly recommend people do that as opposed to like trying to do the self-enforced one, because I gave up on like I would start those classes, get through like 12, 13 courses or like lectures, and then just life happens. But if you're forced to go, you committed to something, it's much easier.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jon. I think that's just about time. So thank you so much coming today. It's been an absolutely wonderful AMA, and thank you for being such a great guest. Hopefully we can have you back. I guess there's one question before we actually call it. Have you done school or self-taught?
So mostly, I regret doing this. I would definitely like do it through the school route if I could, again, because of the reasons I just mentioned. But I did mostly self-taught. So like started with, courses on like online courses, how to use Python for like data analysis. And then like just, so I probably sat through some variant of, the most recent one I did was CS50. That was like 4 years ago. That's the Harvard one. I highly recommend it. They let you submit homework. It's awesome. Then there's, I want to say at Berkeley, it's like CS61, and I forget what it is at MIT, but at MIT, I think they call it like, I can't remember, but all of those are offered online for free. And so if you want to get started, they are very, very good places to just get a basic understanding of like how computing works. And again, I won't tell you I'm an expert. I am the leftiest left curver on our team.
Perfect. Jon, thank you so much. Fantastic AMA. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure the audience has thoroughly enjoyed it. All the best with Abacus Network. We'll be following us very closely, and hopefully Encode and Abacus keep the close relationship. I'm sure we will. Perfect. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for taking an hour out of your day to speak to everyone.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Cheers, everyone. Thank you so much.